Now we'll go live with Congressman Cole and hear a few words about the latest in Washington and in the 4th District. Congressman?
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thank all of you that have taken time to join us on the call. We appreciate it very, very much. Let me talk a little bit more broadly than just Washington for a minute and talk maybe about where the country's at and then some of the responses that are happening in Washington. I would say we haven't seen a period this difficult for the country probably since the beginning of the Great Recession in 2008. I think we have 4 major crises underway now. The first, obviously, is inflation. Everybody on this call knows it. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to the gas pump, if you're in business and you're ordering from your supplier, whatever you're buying is costing you a lot more than it was. Last week or 2 weeks ago, the Consumer Price Index came out. It was a 9.1% increase year-over-year basis. That's the fastest increase in prices in 40 years. We also, that same week, got something called the Producer Price Index. That's what people that are in business, let's say manufacturing or agriculture, are paying to get the products they need to produce the product they sell. That was actually up over 11%. So that suggests that the inflation is with us for a while to come, not likely to fade very quickly. Second crisis, I would argue, is something we know a lot about in Oklahoma, and that's energy. Frankly, again, the price of gasoline is up a lot more than 9.1% on a year-over-year basis, and that's going to drive everything else because anything you do requires energy to produce or to move or distribute, even obviously heating and cooling your home. It's not just the gas tank, it's what you're going to face every month when you're paying your utilities. The third crisis, I would argue, is actually one that's, honestly abroad, and that's the crisis in Ukraine. We see a much more dangerous world than we saw 2 or 3 years ago. It's caused a great deal of difficulty in every respect. And finally, we see another crisis on our domestic southern border, which is, we are every month for the last 16, 18 months had more illegal migrants than we had the year before. This is not a matter of a few percent or 1 or 2. It's up 300-400%. And frankly, while we were told at the beginning, well, this is seasonal. When it gets hotter, you'll see a slowdown because it is dangerous to migrate in this kind of heat. That hasn't happened. The influx of illegal immigrants and, frankly, illegal drugs has gone on with them. So that's a complex of 4 crises the country's facing simultaneously. I would say all of them, to some degree, are policy-related. That is, the wrong policies get you the bad results. Let's talk about inflation quickly. When the president came into office, the economy was coming out of COVID. It was on the mend. It was actually growing at over 6% a year. We were starting to add a lot of jobs back. And a lot of people were warning, okay, we had to do a lot of spending to get through COVID, but now let's pull back the reins a little bit. Instead, the administration chose to pass, literally on party line vote, there wasn't a single Republican that voted for any of this, the so-called American Rescue Package. That was a $2 trillion worth of spending. The Republicans warned at the time, if you do this, it's going to cause a surge in inflation. Inflation was actually running at only 1.4% when the president took office in January of 2021. And Republicans weren't alone in that. Frankly, a lot of economists, particularly respected Democratic economists, warned the same thing. I think particularly of former President Clinton's Secretary of the Treasury, Larry Summers, commonly known, warned, hey, if you do this, and this is a Democratic economist, you're going to have inflation within a year. A guy by the name of Steve Ratner, who many of you will know, he's a television personality, but he was President Obama's car czar, so to speak, in the Great Recession. He warned exactly the same thing. So it wasn't just Republicans saying this, and lo and behold, that's turned out to be true. The president has tried to blame a lot of other people for this. He's tried to blame Vladimir Putin. There's no question Putin bears some responsibility, but inflation was running over 7% before Putin went into the Ukraine and disrupted the world's energy markets and food markets a great deal. So, again, I think it's pretty undisputable that a lot of out-of-control spending, not just the American Rescue Plan, but in other areas, contributed to this. I would argue the same thing is true with energy. On the energy front, from day one, literally the first day the president took office, he suspended the construction of the Keystone Pipeline, which would have brought over 800,000 barrels of Canadian crude into the United States, some of it for us, some of it for the international market, exported through from American refineries along the Gulf Coast. President also restricted exploration and production on federal lands. That's some of the richest mineral-producing lands that we have, and the federal government owns over 20% of the land surface of the United States, a lot of it in very oil and gas and mineral-rich areas in the West, and the same thing offshore. We get a quarter of our petroleum literally from offshore production. Again, a lot of that exploration and leasing was taken out. So again, I think policy contributed, and honestly, that's continued. It's very difficult to get permits and leases on federal lands. It's extraordinarily difficult to get approval for pipelines, things that you need to produce, and frankly, upping production takes a while. And, you have to build the infrastructure to both find it and then transport it and refine it. And those things are all in shorter supply than any of us would like. When you look at the other crises, the southern border, no question that is largely induced by reversal of Trump-era policies along the border. The wall wasn't finished. The number of migrants that are basically, captured and released has gone up dramatically. The so-called wait in Mexico policy, which had been implemented by the last administration, which meant if you come to our country and you're seeking asylum, you have to wait in Mexico until we establish that you're eligible for asylum. And over 80% of the people that apply for asylum are judged not eligible, once an American court actually looks at the claim. Finally, I would argue that the Ukraine crisis is partly a policy failure. I think we all remember the disaster of the Afghanistan withdrawal. I think Putin and the Chinese, President Xi, watched that, and I think they made a calculation. This is going to be a weak American administration. We can be more aggressive. I'm sure Putin remembered that, President Biden was vice president during the Obama administration when they took Ukraine and parts of when they took Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, and other parts of the eastern area, and again, got not much of a pushback from the United States. So I think all of those policy failures have contributed. That doesn't excuse, obviously, the reckless actions of Vladimir Putin or anything of that nature, but I think, again, when you exhibit weakness on the international stage, you get consequences, and I think Ukraine is one of those consequences in my view. What's being done about them in Washington? Well, on the border, frankly, nothing. There's been no reversal in policy by the Biden administration, no change, so that's continued. I would argue on energy, there have been some efforts to try and move back a little bit, but you never get a second chance to make a first impression. The first impression the administration gave is it was very hostile to fossil fuel production, and I think that makes people hesitant to invest, makes them wonder about their security of their long-term investments in that area. And so while we've made some progress, we've increased production, partly that's coming just out of COVID and the economy picking back up, we're still well below where we were in our pre-COVID peak when we were energy independent. In terms of, inflation, we've been able to stop and slow some of the spending. And many people will remember the president had a $5 trillion follow-on program to the American Rescue Plan called Build Back Better. That was stopped. There's a lot of focus on a couple of Democrats who dissented Senator Manchin from West Virginia, Senator Sinema from Arizona. But the reality is, if there weren't 50 Republican senators that were to a person, from moderate Republicans to very conservative Republicans opposed, we wouldn't have been able to stop that and scale it back. Now, there's still a struggle in Washington to push that through, but so far, most of it has been rejected, and we'll be able to get out of this a little bit with, or at least stop most of it. I'm not sure we'll be able to stop it all between now and the November elections, but most of it we've been able to stop. So I count that as at least a measure of progress. In Ukraine, honestly, I would say that there has been great bipartisanship on Ukraine. The United States has pushed back pretty hard. Obviously, we've sent billions of dollars worth of both humanitarian relief and military support to Ukraine. But we're not the only ones that are in that fight. NATO has galvanized itself. The Europeans, much more, I think, than the Russians or maybe even the Europeans themselves expected. So there's lots of countries participating. And most of the military experts, honestly, including our own, thought that the Russians would pretty quickly overrun Ukraine, take the country's capital, Kyiv, and crush its military. And a number of things in that calculation proved wrong. The first one, you have to give credit to the Ukrainian people. They clearly don't want to be part of Russia, and they fought back with incredible tenacity and courage. And they've had heavy casualties, billions of dollars of damage, but they've inflicted a lot of casualties on the Russians. Our best estimates, over 15,000 Russians have died in 5 months, something like 3 times that number have been wounded. The Russians are actually beginning to have problems logistically in supplying their own troops, and they've abandoned their assaults on the Ukrainian capital, refocused on the eastern part of the country, and they're making grudging, difficult progress there. But that's a war still very much in doubt, given the aid that the Americans and the NATO allies and other people around the world, honestly, have provided. So, again, there's some pushback there and some bipartisanship in that, even though there's a lot of differences in the other areas. In Washington right now, there are a number of things underway. We're moving forward on what's called the Appropriations Process, which is funding the government. That's supposed to be done by September 30th. I don't think it will be, but it'll probably get done before the end of this year, and that will have to be a bipartisan agreement. There's a lot of pushing and shoving going on in that right now between the two sides, but for instance, we had 6 appropriations bills up in the House this week in a single package. They were passed on a party line vote. Not a single Republican voted for them. And they will not get through the Senate as written, because you got to get to 60 votes in the Senate to move an appropriations bill. So the Republicans are going to force the Democrats to the negotiating table, and I think we'll be able to accomplish a number of important objectives there. Increase the defense spending. The Biden administration's been very low on that. Last year we pushed it up. I think we'll do that again this year. We'll cut what the president wants to do in terms of domestic spending. They proposed last year an 17 or 18% increase. We held that to about 6%. And so there'll be some give and take. So that's underway. There's a major discussion in the Senate right now that will come to the House probably in short order over what do we do to make sure we're no longer dependent on foreign countries for advanced computer chips. A lot of our weapon systems, literally every single chip, is bought from someplace else, many of them from China. That's not something this country obviously can afford to do, so that's going to be a spirited debate. We still don't know what that legislation is going to look like because it's changing literally hourly in the Senate right now, but that'll be an interesting thing to see. And again, these things will play out in September, and a lot of it, a lot of bills that are being brought up now are being brought up for political purposes. They're so-called messaging bills. That is to try to make a point that Democrats, since they control the House and the Senate, they decide what gets on the floor and what doesn't. Are trying to put things on that they think will, enhance their success in the election, and there's a lot of pushback along those things. So, you've got the complexity of these four crises, only one of which, in my view, is being really addressed in a bipartisan way. You've got the normal functioning of government, which is the appropriations process. You don't want places like Tinker Air Force Base or Fort Sill to shut down because the government closes down. But we've got to get reasonable settlements that are, not too much domestic spending and that make prudent investments in defense in a dangerous world. And all of this is covered to some degree by electoral politics as the two sides position and try to change the balance of power in Washington, D.C. In November so that we have a different Congress next time. But again, that's kind of the state of play. It's very fluid. And with that, why don't we, Melissa, open it up for people to ask questions, and we'll try and answer them as best we can.
Sounds good to me. And again, to callers, if you would like to ask Congressman Cole a question, please press *3 on your telephone now. If you would like to ask the Congressman a question, press *3 on your telephone. First, we will go to John from Noble. John?
John, it's Tom Cole. How are you?
Yeah, hi, Congressman Cole. This is John Kilmer, just outside of Noble here. My question is, what can we do, and what can Congress do to get President Biden's administration to move off the dime on the southern border? That to me is a completely irrational policy, and it's been going on and going on. We've had, I think, now close to 2 million people come across that border. They're not just Mexicans; they're people from all over the world.
Over 150 countries, yeah. So far over 56 on the terrorist watch list that we caught. You don't know about the ones you didn't catch. But anyway, in terms of your question, what can we do? We can actually do some things, and I think even the Democrats are beginning to feel some heat on this. One of the things we were able to get in the appropriations bills was something called a return to Title 42 authority. That allows the Border Patrol, because of COVID and the danger of the spread of disease, to literally expel people on that basis alone and do it quickly and easily. This is something the Biden administration has tried to get rid of. It was an authority that the Trump administration used, and we've used since President Biden has been in office to return over 1 million people illegally that have entered the country illegally, and we've been successful in that. But I think probably the most important thing, honestly, is to send a message in November. You get a different House of Representatives, and it'll start pushing legislation into the Senate. Now, to be fair, the president still has a veto. He can sustain that veto. But you see Democrats beginning to abandon him in some of these competitive races in the Senate. Senator Kelly has disagreed with the president on Title 42 authority. He's a senator from Arizona who happens to be on the ballot this year. Senator Hassan in New Hampshire. You don't think of New Hampshire as worried about the border, but it's become a big issue there. She's in a very tight race in a state that is really a 50-50 kind of state in terms of its political power, so she's abandoning. We're starting to see some things in other states where, again, Democrats, even Senator Warnock, same thing in Georgia. He's a Democratic senator, was elected for just 2-year period in the last election. So these are not conservative Republicans, but they're getting the message. So I think the most important message is probably going to be delivered at the ballot box. And if this is your compelling issue, it's pretty hard for anybody, even if you're pro-Biden or pro-administration, to defend the actions, because it's clearly an abject failure. The sheer numbers of people coming across, again, has increased exponentially. The amount of drugs, and we know what we've lost thousands of people to fentanyl in our own country, pouring across. And again, Republicans will propose and certainly pass through the House much stiffer measures on the border, and frankly more money for enforcement. Probably try and push certainly to continue the construction of the wall. It was silly to ever stop that. It's not enough in and of itself, and it's not a continuous law, but it does help funnel illegal migrants to places where you can then concentrate border patrol and what have you. And, Border Patrol needs to know they've got at least a Congress that is supportive of them, not critical of them. But again, a lot we can do, some we've been able to do, but, at the end of the day, people have to react politically and elect people that are willing to take tough measures on the border and return to policies that we know worked. Because, again, as recently as 18 months ago, we didn't have anything remotely like the problems we're having right now.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, we will go to Jim from Ada. Jim?
Hi, Jim.
Thank you for taking the call, Congressman. My question is what's the Congress going to try to do about all these foreigners, especially China, buying up all the farmland and all of the processing plants around the United States, and specifically in Oklahoma, they're buying up land just by the droves. Stratford, Oklahoma over there is just almost all Chinese anymore.
Well, a lot of that, of course, related to the cannabis issue in Oklahoma, which
absolutely. But I'm worried more or less about the farmland all over the country. They're buying up farmland, and they're also hoarding wheat and corn. They're buying it up all over the world, I guess, but specifically America, and they're hoarding it.
Congress can do quite a bit in terms of making it more difficult for any foreign country to buy land. There's nothing moving through Congress right now on that, but there is, I think, a growing bipartisan awareness of this. So, again, I think you got a different Congress. You'll have different legislative proposals, and probably some things will be done. But the concern is noted, and there are efforts to begin to do things legislatively. Nothing, I think, is going to happen between now and the election.
Thank you, Congressman. Now we will go to Bob from Oklahoma City. Bob?
Hi, Bob. Bob, are you there? Are you on mute?
Sorry, he must have dropped off.
No, that can happen.
Okay, well, we will go to Joe from Lawton then.
Hi, Joe. This is Tom Cole. How are you?
Mr. Cole, thank you, number one, for conducting these town hall meetings. And thank you for being so receptive and taking time out of your busy schedule to host this and to accept our questions.
Well, thank you for taking the time to participate.
Hey, sir, I'm an American. It's my duty. As of the last release of over almost 5 million barrels of oil, our national reserves are at the lowest since July of 1985. And some of this oil is being sent to China instead of being refined and used in the United States. How can this be?
It's a mystery to me. I was opposed to any release of the strategic oil reserve for exactly the reasons you said. We've lowered it to a dangerous level, and that's there for a genuine national emergency. High prices are inconvenient, but you can still buy gasoline and petroleum products in the United States. And this is very dangerous, and it's incredibly hypocritical because you remember when oil literally 2 years ago was very cheap. President Trump actually tried to buy oil and fill up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to capacity. He argued, hey, this is the time to do it. It'll help the domestic industry. It's dirt cheap. We can sell it back when the prices get high. Democrats in Congress blocked him from doing that. He wouldn't do it, and now we're buying at much higher well, we're not buying at all. We're selling but we'll have to replace this at some point at a lot higher prices. So this is a very controversial thing. It's very politically timed. This runs out just right before the election. But it's something that, again, this is not what we need to be doing. We need to be not using the stockpiles that we have, but encouraging more production. And again, we know we can do that. We were producing well over 13 million barrels a day when COVID hit. We're now producing about 11.4. That's still, by the way, the largest production in the world, and it's higher than it was when President Biden took office. So energy companies are trying to restore production. But again, they need somebody giving them the green light, supporting, saying we really are going to open up our lands and our offshore areas. We recognize we're in a crisis. We recognize our people are hurting, and we're going to sustain that policy. We're not going to pull the rug out from under you, so make the investments now, and we'll try to get the price back down and certainly make sure the country is never in a position of being dependent. Recently, I'm sure you noticed that the president went to Saudi Arabia, and one of the aims was to try and get the Saudis to produce more oil. They've not made a commitment in that regard. I hope they do. It would help bring down the prices. We don't buy a lot of Saudi crude, but other countries do. And certainly our friends in Europe that have been got themselves honestly too heavily addicted to Russian oil and natural gas are looking for alternatives now. So we need to be providing them, and so do others. But again, this administration's been pretty hostile to the industry, been very hostile to Saudi Arabia. But the president's time would have been better spent going to Dallas, Houston, Oklahoma City, Cheyenne, Wyoming, other energy centers, talking to our friends in Louisiana that do such an amazing job offshore, and talking about what are the things we need to do to encourage you to produce more petroleum here in the United States. And sadly, they've had a couple of meetings, but I haven't seen much change in policy that's going to make a significant difference in American energy production.
Thank you, Congressman. And just to remind callers, if you'd like to ask the Congressman a question, please press *3 on your telephone. If you'd like to ask the Congressman a question, press *3 on your telephone. Now we will go to Curtis from Wilson. Curtis?
Hey, Curtis, how are you?
Oh, not too bad. I want to ask about what you're going to do about our Second Amendment rights.
Well, about everything I can. I'm an NRA member and have an A rating and never voted for gun control. I've voted against every one of the measures that have been proposed by the administration. Probably next week there will be what they call an assault weapons ban on the floor. They're trying to round up votes for that now. We actually have a few Democrats that may help us on that. I don't think there'll be any Republican votes for it. It's really a ban on AR-15s, on semi-automatics. And I think we're going to be able to keep that from happening. But this is an issue that, again, Democrats think works to their advantage politically. I will say that they've not been able to pass. They did one piece of gun control legislation through. It didn't ban any weapons. Actually, a lot of it was things that made common sense. What can we do to make schools more secure? What can we do to make sure that people that are illegally getting guns not get them? What can we do on the mental health front? But at the end of the day, there's 400 million guns in the United States that are legally in circulation. There's about 20 million or so AR-15. So anybody that thinks by passing a law you're going to end that, it just doesn't work that way. We have to do a better job of identifying people. Almost everybody that owns a firearm uses it appropriately, literally 99.8 or 9%. You don't keep people that are going to use them inappropriately by punishing the people that have not violated the law. Our delegation is pretty rock solid on this. I mean, Oklahoma is a state where there's a high number of people that legally and professionally, own and use firearms for sporting, for hunting, for make sure they're secure in their own homes, and particularly people in more remote rural areas where it takes police a long time to respond if something that happens. So, again, I don't think you need to worry about our delegation on that. They're pretty dug in on that issue, and you can pretty much count on the 5 Oklahomans in the House and both our senators to do everything they can to make sure the Second Amendment isn't infringed on. So far, we've been largely but not completely successful.
Thank you, Congressman. And now we will go with Tiffany. Tiffany?
Hi, Tiffany.
Yeah. Good evening, Congressman Cole. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. I hope you're doing well.
Well, I'm beating the heat here in Oklahoma.
Well, it's not as bad in Washington, but almost. It's more humid, but yeah, I know. I'm talking to my family, and it's pretty beastly. So please be careful.
I got in my car day before yesterday, and car said it was 119 in my driveway, and my eyes about bugged out of my head.
I can believe it. I talked to Frank Lucas, who borders my district to the west, and he had to go home sadly for a funeral, and I called him on a legislative matter because I wanted his advice, and he was driving back to the airport, and I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm someplace just a little bit east of Clinton, and it's 112 degrees." So, wow.
My mama always said, Oklahoma weather ain't for sissies.
That's exactly right. She gave you good advice.
My question for you, Congressman, is our country is facing a lot of issues. You've got the Ukraine thing, you've got the inflation thing, which the Ukraine thing has contributed to. You've got the energy thing with the oil and Biden going to Saudi Arabia. And there's so many issues that our country is facing due to the resident at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, and I understand that we do not have the majority in the House and we're tied in the Senate. Okay, but there are so many situations out there that have been publicized and that the people of the state of Oklahoma know about. You've got Hunter Biden's laptop. You've got the hack of Hunter Biden's cell phone that is an absolute atrocity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like I don't know if you've seen any of it, but you don't want to because there's parts of Hunter Biden I wish I'd never seen.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
What is our Oklahoma delegation doing? Hunter Biden is a threat to national security. He is a member. He's a board member of Burisma. He's a board member to the energy company that Biden just sold all that oil to over in China. He is a threat to national security on a catastrophic level. What is our Oklahoma delegation doing in the House and the Senate to look at these and to get something done about it?
Well, remember, until you get the majority, you don't decide what the committee considers. And I think that could probably change in November. Certainly, probably in the House. The Senate's much more of a coin toss sort of thing. If that happens, I think you'll see immediate investigations in all those areas. What's called the House Oversight Committee, which would look at this, the top Republicans, a gentleman by the name of James Comer from Kentucky, he's been, if you happen to catch him, he's been all over the air on this subject and has promised there will be hearings on that. There is a Justice Department look at Hunter Biden right now. The president has said he won't have anything to do with it. We'll see what happens. There's a grand jury that's been convened and looking into whether or not he's violated everything from, being a lobbyist, an unregistered foreign lobbyist, to tax issues and what have you. I have no knowledge of what they will decide. I do know the investigation's ongoing. The U.S. Attorney in Delaware, I think, has been conducting it, but that's not for. I mean, we'll know when they do something publicly, but there's no way to know, and Congress can investigate what the majority wants to investigate. So you have a lot of investigations of January 6th. You don't have much of Hunter Biden. Things change in November. That probably changes as well. But our delegation is doing, honestly, pretty much everything it can. And, again, these margins are very close. The Democrats hold the House by 435 members. They've got a 5-seat majority. So that could change pretty quickly. Obviously, a 50-50 Senate, they control it by virtue of having the vice president's vote to break a tie. You're not going to have committees that Democrats chair probably look very aggressively at a Democratic administration. So if that flips, I think you'll see Senate investigations as well. But again, that hinges on what happens in November.
All right. Next, we will go to Anita from Norman. Anita?
Hi, Anita.
Yes, hi, Congressman Cole. How are you today?
Very good, thank you.
Good, good. I am wanting to know what you're thinking about the midterm situation regarding the recent Roe versus Wade. Well, I don't know if I want to call it a fiasco or what I want to call it, but there's so many people now who are up in arms about the situation, particularly the Democrats. And so when I look online, I see all of the commentaries from the left-wing news people, and it's all about how Biden's going to do this and Biden's going to fix everything, and the Republicans are bad. And I know Senator Langford just made a proposal that the moving from one state to another, or the travel interstate, was really not a necessity to go ahead and address in a legal manner. But it just seems like now things were going really well in a lot of ways towards the Republicans really getting a strong hold back, and I don't know, it just seems like I hear a lot of talk on that subject that could sort of make a big dent, because the impression is that it's negative with so many people.
Yeah, no, there's no question it's a huge issue. But what the Supreme Court effectively did was turn the decision back over to the states. And so you're going to see a checkerboard of different laws. Oklahoma is very conservative, and it had what's called the trigger law, which means if there was a decision, state would immediately implement policies that made it very difficult to get abortions except in cases of life of the mother. I'm not sure about the state law in terms of rape and incest. If you live in New York or California or Colorado, not very far, it's not going to change. Those states are strongly blue states. They've made it very clear they don't intend to change their laws. The estimates are the reversal of Roe versus Wade will probably result in maybe 10 to 13% fewer abortions in the country. But most of the places that are favorably inclined are going to remain that. Matter of fact, I would say all of those places. Other places that have been traditionally more conservative, and that's how the abortion thing was playing out before Roe versus Wade. Different states were trying different approaches and doing different things. And basically, Roe took something that was very controversial, and 9 people that were not elected by anybody made the decision. Now, honestly, the most important voices on this issue are going to be your governor and your state legislators, because they're going to make the law in your respective states. So I think this issue is going to be with us for some time. It's very unlikely the Supreme Court will change and again come up with a uniform ruling for the entire country. They believe very strongly, the current court does, in federalism, that is, allowing states to make their own decisions. I think it's very unlikely that Congress will enact a uniform national law. The filibuster still is in the Senate rules. The Republicans actually are strongly supportive of the filibuster, even when they were in the majority, and there was a lot of pressure to get rid of it. They kept it. The filibuster simply means that to end debate and move ahead legislatively, you have to have 60 votes. You don't have to have 60 votes to pass the legislation, but to bring it up, in the first place, at least 60 people want to consider it. So I don't think either side is likely to get 60 votes in the United States Senate soon. The Republicans actually have never held 60 votes in the Senate. The last time the Democrats held 60 votes in the Senate was for a period of about a year, in the first year of the Obama administration. Then they lost a special election in, of all places, Massachusetts, and they're back at 59. So filibuster really forces bipartisanship and forces you back toward the middle. It's very frustrating if you're in the majority in the House, because a majority of one, if everybody sticks together, you can do something major and sweeping in the House. But in the end, the Senate rule structure, and again, nobody in the House has anything to say about that. There's 100 senators that make their decisions about what the rules are, on the Republican side, at least, they've always been strongly, and Democrats are all for the filibuster when they're in the minority. When they're in the majority, then they want to change it and pass sweeping changes on 50 senators and a tie-breaking vote from the vice president. But again, I don't see much likelihood for federal legislation in the near term. That would be the next 2 or 3 years. So if there's going to be a resolution inside Oklahoma, really Oklahomans are going to make up their minds about that through their state senators, state reps, and the governor. And right now that's a pretty strongly pro-life group. But again, it'll be resolved. It'll be very different in California. It'll be very different, as I said, in New York, very different in Delaware and Vermont, very different. And I think you'll see a variety of different legal dispositions of this issue, from very, very conservative, which is where Oklahoma is now, to very, very liberal, which is where a state like California, or let's say Vermont. It's not just big states. We have very conservative small states, and very liberal small states. Delaware and Vermont are, by Oklahoma standards, extremely liberal and heavily Democratic. So it really gets down to what people in your area think, and that'll determine the law. Really, in some ways, this is less of a federal issue now than it has been in many, many years.
Thank you, Congressman. And now we will go to Lee from Lawton. Lee?
Hey, Lee.
Hey, hi. Yes, sir. This is Lee Mann from Lawton, Oklahoma. My question is, I'm very hopeful that the Republicans are going to assume power in November. What's the plan? Do we have a new contract for America like Newt did back in the day?
Actually, we do. It'll be released in September. We're working on it now. It'll be called the Commitment to America, and Republicans will lay out, these are our legislative goals. If we're there, these are the things that we commit to pass through the House. Obviously, we can't guarantee what would happen in the Senate or how the president would resolve it any more than Newt Gingrich could. What Gingrich said is, we will vote on these things and we're going to get them passed. And by and large, he did. Now, they didn't all pass the Senate, but quite a few of them did pass both houses, and eventually were signed, some by President Clinton. Welfare reform was quite a struggle, and that was one of them. So again, we will lay that out. It's being debated and discussed now. It's come quite a long way. You'll see, what do Republicans want to do on energy? What do they want to do where China's concerned? What's their plan in terms of tax policy? What are they going to do in terms of spending? And so I think you'll see some pretty specific proposals, and they will be clearly in front of you before you have to vote in November.
All right, and next we will, if you would like to ask the Congressman a question, please press *3 on your telephone now. If you'd like to ask the Congressman a question, press *3 on your telephone. And next we will go to Harry from Moore. Harry?
Hey, Harry, how are you?
Yes. Hi, how you doing?
Well, pretty good. You're in my hometown, so I hope things are going good for you.
Well, it's going good. A little bit on the hot side, but we can live with that. So, anyway, my question is the thing about cars and vehicles and stuff, thing between gas and electric. I'm really concerned because they're saying that the price of the electric cars will be so high, even getting electricity in them. And now what's that going to do to the retired people that's barely paying electricity for their house? Because that's going to have, you know.
No, you're exactly right. And if we made electric vehicles too rapidly, or they became too popular too rapidly, you would actually challenge the grid because it doesn't have the capacity to take care of heating, cooling, powering our industry and all that, plus take over a huge part of the fleet. So there will be an effort, and there already is, to upgrade the grid, strengthen it, and gradually make it able to handle more calls. And it really depends on where you live right now. I mean, electric vehicles are less than 5% of the vehicles on the road. I think in Oklahoma they're less than 2%. It takes a while to build up the charging stations and things like that. In the past, you know, that was done by private industry. I think it still will be, but in the transportation bill that was passed, I did not vote for this, so let me be very upfront on that. And nobody in our delegation actually did, but there was $75 billion set aside to start building new charging stations, and there was some more money for the electric grid. There was also some more money for that in the so-called American Rescue Plan. But you're right, and these cars are expensive. I mean, the average price is $66,000, I believe, which you know, that's pretty steep, and there are some tax subsidies that are applied, both the national and state level. The other thing, if you do it too fast, you know, you start taking the revenue, which is out of the Highway Trust Fund. You know, every time you buy a gallon of gas, some of that's federal tax that goes into the Highway Trust Fund, some of it's state that goes into our Highway Trust Fund in Oklahoma, and we use that to build and maintain the roads. Well, if you're in an electric vehicle or you're driving CNG, you're not contributing to that. There's no federal tax on energy, electricity that diverts into the Highway Trust Fund. So that's something Congress is going to have to work on. Oklahoma's actually been a little bit ahead here. You've got some pretty far-sighted state legislators who have worked on ways in which electric vehicles will have to contribute toward the maintenance, because obviously they're the same weight. They're going up and down the highways and using them, but right now, or at least until we pass the appropriate legislation, there's no federal legislation. I think there is some state legislation that begins to divert some money in there. So again, we make sure that everybody that uses the road pays for the road. But you're right, there's a lot of problems with this, and it's not going to come as rapidly as I think some people would like, simply because the infrastructure there in terms of charging, in terms of generating the electricity and moving that electricity is not sufficient for huge numbers of vehicles to overnight become electric. So it'll be a gradual process, in my opinion. But there are some countries where it's advanced very rapidly. Some of the Scandinavian countries now have close to 50% of their vehicles that are electric. And I think Denmark actually has 55. So when it catches on, it may well go pretty fast. But those are small countries, and they don't drive distances anywhere like an average Oklahoman would, going to work, let alone just, you know, travel. And so, again, we don't have yet the electric infrastructure. You see some of it being developed. For instance, a lot of our rural electric co-ops have begun to focus on this problem. Those are the same people that developed electricity for rural Oklahoma, and they've begun to do this in terms of their fleets of vehicles that they use to maintain their electric systems and the rural co-ops in the state. But again, it's going to be a long, slow, complex process.
Thank you, Congressman. And again, if you'd like the chance to ask the Congressman a question, please press *3 on your telephone. And if you'd like to opt in to be called on future telephone town halls like this, please press 1. Now we will go to Alexander from Ryan. Alexander?
Hey, Alexander, how are you?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So my question or comment both is on the southern border with all the illegals that are coming across. When I was I'm 40 years old. I grew up in South Texas. I moved here to Oklahoma 12 years ago. But when I was a little boy back in the 80s, my dad worked lots of illegals, and the U.S. our country came out with a law that said if you haul an illegal in your pickup truck and we catch you, we're gonna take your truck away. And if you get caught working one, you're going to get fined lots of money. And I don't remember, I was a little kid, I don't remember all the particulars. Everybody quit working them. Nobody would move them. Nobody would haul them. Nobody would work them. It just like they went back home the same way they got up here. They walked or they caught a bus. And then the rules got lax and the government quit enforcing that. So, you know, when we have a problem with something coming into our home, we can either try to block the problem from getting inside, or they're usually coming inside because there's something really good to eat. And so if we take away the desire for them to come, such as welfare benefits and or a job, is there ever any discussion in the meeting? Are you ever involved in any kind of discussions about the illegal immigrants? And is there ever any discussion in any of the meetings that you attend about taking away the benefits that illegals are taking advantage of in this country?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of discussion about that. There's also discussion about a friend of mine from California's proposed legislation years ago, and we have a system now. It's called E-Verify, where they can check Social Security numbers and things like that, and it makes it much quicker to determine whether somebody, you know, if you punch in the numbers and all of a sudden you got 6 people with the same number, it's pretty clear what's going on. So there are things like that. I'll just be honest with you. Democrats generally oppose that. They oppose the benefit, restrictions. And again, it's not like the United States is not generous with people coming in. Over 1 million people enter our country legally every year. We take more people in than anybody else in the world. It's not even close. And to be fair, you know, there's not an illegal problem in China. Nobody wants to move to China unless you live in North Korea. And there's not illegal people trying to get into Russia. They build walls to keep people in, not keep them out. So we are a very attractive place. We have been that throughout most of our history. But we did have a much better control on this situation in the last administration than we do in this one. Because the last administration made an effort and made it more difficult to get in illegally, not legally. As a matter of fact, it's very interesting. You know, Republicans just won a special House election. This by a lady named Mayra Flores. She's the newest member of Congress. She was born in Mexico. She's the first person to enter Congress, first woman, I think, first person that was actually born in Mexico. She came with her parents legally to the United States. Her husband is actually a Border Patrol agent, and she feels very strongly that there's a right way to enter the United States, and her family did it that way, and we need to enforce those things. And we need, literally, those border communities are being overrun, and there's a lot of crime and drugs that are associated with this. It's pretty scary. You know, if you're out in some stretch in South Texas and you see a group of 20 or 30 people coming by your house and, you know, you're a long way away from law enforcement. It's a big country, a lot of open space. It's difficult. So there are efforts to do that. But again, you know, we had reasonable control of the border, not perfect, but it was getting better. During, honestly, the Trump years, they got better. And we need to, number one, go back to that. And if you need to make a change in the law, we have elections here. We have a process whereby you can do that and propose legislation, then we can do that. But what's happening now is just literally a total open border. There's a lot of human trafficking associated with this. You know, some people come across for crime. Most people coming across to look for work. I have no doubt of that. But some people are bringing drugs. Some people are coming to commit crime. Some people are on terrorist watch lists. And some people are bringing other people in human bondage. It's usually young women for sexual exploitation. You know, it's absolutely outrageous. And you've got to back up the Border Patrol, and you've got to give them the personnel and the budget. You know, when the president proposed his first budget, we're now in the second budget. His first budget called for increasing domestic spending by 18%. There was not one dime more for border security, not one dime more for the Customs and Border Patrol people, the wall that was under construction, and you know, actually every administration since the Bush administration has added to, even the Obama administration added barriers and things. That was moving along apace, and it was having a difference. All that was stopped. So again, I think from a Republican standpoint, this will be one of the top issues as to what to do to restore this. The Remain in Mexico policy was a very effective deterrent. You knew if you got here and you were claiming asylum, you weren't let into the country until you proved at a court of law that you were eligible for asylum. I mean, just because you're living in difficult circumstances doesn't entitle you to enter the country. If you're subject to genocide or persecution because of your religious faith or something like that, this is a very generous country in terms of taking you in. But again, there's lots of discussions on the Republican side. Honestly, this administration just simply does not have a border policy. Its border policy was to undo anything Trump did, and they've not put one new thing in place that would discourage anybody from coming. You know, I've been to a lot of Central and South America and to Mexico a fair amount, you know, no disrespect to those countries in any regard, but America's just a whole lot more attractive place. I get it. I understand it, but there's a limit to what we can do. Honestly, the people here have every right to decide who can and can't come in. And are you bringing a skill that we need? Is it something that we require? If you're in a category where you need asylum, then we should look at that and try to be helpful. This country was we just took a lot of Afghans in that had every reason to come. These were people that had put their faith in the United States, and all of a sudden their lives were at risk when we pulled out of Afghanistan the manner in which we did, a debacle. So this country, and actually very proud of Oklahoma. Oklahoma was one of the top 3 states in the country in resettling Afghan refugees. Those people were legitimate refugees. I mean, they were at risk. You know, there's a right way for people to enter the country legally by our rules. Myra Flores and her family did that. She's now a member of the Congress of the United States, and in a district that hadn't elected a Republican in over 100 years. You know, and so her friend's a neighbor, and she represents an 84% Hispanic district, 84%. And they elected a conservative Republican who's tough on the border because they've seen the consequences of policies where you're not tough on the border. And, you know, again, we have to be, you know, we're humane. You know, our Border Patrol people are not shooting people coming across the border, but they need to have the ability to stop people and to keep them from coming or to return them expeditiously if they've come in illegally. And obviously, we need to prosecute anybody involved in human trafficking, drugs, and that kind of nefarious activity, or if you're on the criminal watch list, for God's sake. And to be fair, the ones that catch on there, I don't think they're releasing them, but it's just so easy to get across when we're catching a lot more of them now. And we've caught more in the last year than I think we did in the previous 4. It's just people know you can get across that border, and that has got to be reversed. That'll be a top priority in Republican Congress, but we're probably going to need a change in the administration, or at least a change of attitude. I think if they suffer a bad enough defeat politically, that'll probably wake some people up that this is a problem we better get on top of, or there'll be a Republican president in 2024. But you use elections sometimes to send a message.
Thank you, Congressman. We have now reached the end of our telephone town hall. I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but you'll have the opportunity to leave a message and receive a call back from our office after Congressman Cole provides some final words. Congressman?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Melissa, and thank all of you for taking the time. I know you have other things to do, and this seems to be the most efficient way for us to reach people, and they seem to like it. We will continue to do these. As Melissa said, you can opt in where we will notify you every time we do one. You decide whether you want to participate or not, and we literally put out thousands of calls, and we'll have thousands of people on these phone lines in the call. I would just, number one, thank you for your questions, and if we didn't get to the topic you were interested in, if you'll email our office or write us or contact one of our 3 district offices. We have one in Norman, one in Ada, one in Lawton. We'll try and get you the help. If you've got a specific problem, whether it's a veterans issue or a Social Security issue, we'll try and be helpful on that as well. We have some really fine caseworkers that focus on trying to help you if you got a problem with government. But mostly I would just, hope that you stay engaged. You're in a political year. A lot of candidates are reaching out to you. That's fine. Just listen to what they have to say. Ask them the questions that interest you the most. And please take the time to go vote and express your opinion wherever you are in the political spectrum. The last thing I would tell you, while we are in a very difficult time, I do think we have an unusual collection of challenges, from immigration to Ukraine to inflation to energy to other issues as well. Remember, people are coming here because it's the greatest country in the world. It has the most opportunity and the most freedom, and it's played a role in spreading freedom all over the world, and it's still the envy of the world. And the institutions we have work. You don't win every election, you're not successful every time, but over time, the American people usually get in office who they want to get in office. And I agree some days, I don't agree others, but that's the point. It's still a very good system, still works very well, and I would just urge you not to lose faith in it. It's responsive over time to what people want to do, and we'll get through these difficult times, and things, I think, will ultimately get better. But we do have some challenges in front of us, and we just need to be very serious as a country and recognize that to whom much is given, and much has been given to us as Americans. We're very blessed people, in my view. Much is expected, but we've always risen to the challenge. Didn't matter if it was a Great Depression, didn't matter if it was a world war, didn't matter if it was a civil war, didn't matter if it was the fight for civil rights. The country has broadly moved in the right direction, and we will again. So just thank you for taking the time, and it's a great privilege to visit with those of you I got to talk with. We'll do this again soon. Hopefully we'll get to talk to more of you. With that, Melissa, let me turn it back to you.